The night in the hospital was always quiet, too quiet. It was the kind of silence that made the walls seem like they were closing in, like they had secrets to tell. Dr. Emeka had always been the kind of doctor who worked long hours, but tonight was different. Tonight, there was something strange in the air, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He looked around the darkened ward, half empty, with the faint smell of antiseptic still lingering. But there was no one in the corridor, no nurses to talk to, only the soft hum of machines. And then he felt it, something strange stirring in his body, as though his very skin was changing. It all started a few weeks ago when Dr. Emeka had noticed his own blood pressure creeping up, and his energy levels dipping. He had never been one to show weakness, but lately, it felt like he was no longer in control of his own body. What he didn't know was that a strange, dark force was taking over him, changing him bit by bit. As he made his rounds, he began to feel something growing inside him, an unnatural urge that he couldn't shake. Something was whispering to him from within, a voice telling him that the hospital was where he belonged, and his patients were his true source of power. One night, after an especially tiring shift, Dr. Emeka stumbled into his office and collapsed into his chair. He was exhausted, but he couldn't sleep. The strange feeling inside him had become stronger, gnawing at him, urging him to do something he couldn't explain. He stared at his reflection in the window and watched in horror as his face began to distort. His body twitched and shifted, and before he could react, he felt an unbearable itch on his back. It was as though something was crawling under his skin. His eyes widened as he realized what was happening. He was changing, his body shrank, and his hands turned into tiny wings. He gasped as his skin softened, turning a dark, glossy hue. Dr. Emeka's heart raced in panic. He could feel the transformation, the loss of his human form, the shrinking of his limbs. He had become a mosquito. He was no longer the respected doctor he had been just hours ago. And yet, in his mind, he felt an unsettling sense of control. He had been transformed into something new, something powerful. But it wasn't just the feeding that consumed him, it was the selling. He wasn't just feeding to survive, he was also selling the blood he collected. He had learned that there was a black market for blood, especially from rare and healthy individuals. He had made connections with shady figures who were willing to pay top dollar for the blood he could provide. It wasn't just a source of nourishment, it was a business. And Dr. Emeka had become a master at it. As the days passed, Emeka's grip on his humanity slipped further. He continued to hunt, to feed, to sell. The hospital became his personal domain, a place where he could transform at will, where he could satisfy his insatiable need. And yet, every time he looked in the mirror, he saw the man he used to be, the doctor who had sworn to do no harm. It was a painful reminder of what he had lost, of the man he had become. Dr. Emeka flew out of the window, his tiny wings buzzing with a new purpose. He could feel the cool night air against his body, the thrill of flight. The city sprawled beneath him, and he darted through the streets, seeking his first victim. It didn't take long. He spotted a man walking alone down a dimly lit alley. The man's blood pulsed in his veins, and Dr. Emeka couldn't resist. He landed on the man's neck, sinking his needle-like proboscis into the skin. The blood was warm, rich, and satisfying. But it wasn't just the taste of blood that thrilled him, it was the power he felt as he drained it from the man's body. As he flew away, he could feel the blood pumping through him, his body filled with strength and energy. It was a rush like no other. He had never felt so alive. But as he soared higher into the night sky, the weight of what he had just done began to settle in. He had taken another man's life force, and for what? To feed his own insatiable hunger. What had he become? Dr. Emeka's transformation wasn't just physical. The longer he stayed in this mosquito form, the more he realized that his mind was also changing. The thoughts that once filled his head, thoughts of healing, of helping people, had been replaced by a darker, more primal desire. The hunger to feed, to drain the life from others, had taken over his every thought. He could still feel the pull of his former self, the doctor who cared for his patients, but it was becoming harder to remember who he had been. Every night, Dr. Emeka would return to the hospital, where he would slip into his human form, pretending to be the caring doctor once more. He would check on his patients, offer words of comfort, but inside, he knew the truth. He was no longer the man he once was. Every time he looked at a patient, he saw not a person in need of care, but a potential meal. His eyes would linger on the veins in their arms, the pulse of life that beckoned him. But it wasn't just the feeding that consumed him, it was the selling. He wasn't just feeding to survive, he was also selling the blood he collected. He had learned that there was a black market for blood, especially from rare and healthy individuals. He had made connections with shady figures who were willing to pay top dollar for the blood he could provide. It wasn't just a source of nourishment, it was a business. And Dr. Ēmeka had become a master at it. As the days passed, 𝗕𝗟𝗢𝗢𝗢's grip on his humanity slipped further. He continued to hunt, to feed, to sell. The hospital became his personal domain, a place where he could transform at will, where he could satisfy his insatiable need. And yet, every time he looked in the mirror, he saw the man he used to be, the doctor who had sworn to do no harm. It was a painful reminder of what he had lost, of the man he had become. But there were whispers. Whispers among the nurses and patients, rumors of a mysterious illness spreading through the hospital. People were getting sick, weak, and some even disappeared without a trace. The staff couldn't explain it, but Dr. Ēmeka knew the truth. He was the cause. The blood he had been taking was slowly draining the life out of the patients, weakening them, making them vulnerable. He had become a parasite, feeding off the very people he had sworn to protect. One night, as 𝗕𝗟𝗢𝗢𝗢 hovered over his next victim, a woman in a private room, he hesitated. Something inside him recoiled at the thought of draining her blood. He had never felt this before, guilt, remorse, something that had long been buried deep within him. It was fleeting, but it was there. And in that moment of hesitation, the woman's eyes opened, and she looked directly at him. The woman's eyes were filled with fear, but there was something else, something strange, something unsettling. She stared at him, as though she recognized him, as though she knew what he had become. Dr. Ēmeka froze, his wings trembling. She couldn't possibly know, could she? He had been so careful, so precise, hiding his secret from everyone. But there was no mistaking the look in her eyes. She knew that you're not what you seem, the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. I've seen you before. You're the doctor. The one who? She trailed off, and Dr. Ēmeka felt a cold shiver run through him. How had she known? Who was this woman? And what did she mean by those words? This is the end of part 1 of this story. Part 2 will be uploaded soon.